Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's special COVID-19 webinar hosted by the International Society for the Prevention of Child Abuse and Neglect. We thank you for joining us today and appreciate all you're doing to help child protection during this challenging time. Online child sexual exploitation is a global crime that requires a coordinated global response, particularly at a time when children and offenders are spending more time online due to the COVID-19 pandemic. WePROTECT Global Alliance brings together a coalition of 97 governments, 31 civil society organizations, and 28 technology companies to tackle this global crime and collaborate on solutions. In recognition of the risks that the pandemic can pose to children, WePROTECT has worked with its members to publish an intelligence brief on the impact of COVID-19 on online child sexual exploitation. You can find the brief and a PDF of today's slides in the handout section of this webinar. Today, Ian Drennan, Executive Director of WePROTECT Global Alliance, sets out the intelligent brief's sobering conclusions and explains how it is more important than ever for the global community to work together to ensure children are kept safe online. Right now, I have the audience on mute to avoid background noise. We welcome you to enter any questions or comments you have in the questions box during the presentation. The presenter will answer questions at the end as time permits. Ian Drennan has been the Executive Director of WePROTECT Global Alliance since its launch as an independent international institution in April 2020. Previously, he led the UK Home Office's international response to child sexual abuse, including its support for WePROTECT Global Alliance. Prior to this, Ian worked in national security and counterterrorism roles in the Foreign and Commonwealth Office, Cabinet Office, and Office of Security and Counterterrorism, including a posting in Kabul, where he managed counterterrorism and anti-corruption justice. Ian, we thank you so much for being with us today and for sharing this important information and for your contributions to child protection. Now I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you very much. So I am just going to bring up my screen.
Okay, looks good.
Thank you. So I just want to say, first of all, a huge thank you to ISPACAN for inviting me and WePROTECT Global Alliance to present in this webinar. I was just saying before I came on that as so many of us are working from home, are feeling isolated, that these kind of events where we can connect with our communities and we can reach out to new stakeholders are more important than ever. And I really welcome this chance to speak to you today and to share the conclusions of our threat assessment. But just first, a little bit of introduction on WePROTECT Global Alliance. So it's the largest and most diverse international alliance dedicated to countering online child sexual exploitation. And actually, further to Heather's introduction, we are actually up to 30 technology industry members, so 97 countries, 30 tech industry companies and 31 civil society organizations, and that's only in a couple of weeks that we've been able to grow, and this is constant interest in this issue, particularly in light of the current pandemic. Just to set into a little context where we came from. We are actually the product of a merger between two initiatives. One called WePROTECT, which was set up by the UK Prime Minister at the time, David Cameron, in 2014, which brought together tech industry, countries, and CSOs. And the other was the Global Alliance to End Child Exploitation Online, which was led by the European Commission and the US Department of Justice. Back in 2016, there was recognition that we could achieve more together, so we joined the two initiatives to become WePROTECT Global Alliance. For that period, WePROTECT Global Alliance sat within the UK government, the UK Home Office, which is our Interior Ministry, and was staffed, the Secretariat was staffed from that. But the plan was always that we would eventually roll out to become an independent entity. So the UK would provide the funding to enable that to happen. So a big part of my job last year was on managing that transition leading up to our launch as an independent entity on the 1st of April this year. So our mission is to put online child sexual exploitation on the global agenda and coordinate an international campaign to end it. And underneath that overall mission, we have 3 key objectives. One is advocacy, so to get the issue onto the tables of key decision makers, whether those be in the private sector or leading civil society organizations, or ministers and heads of state in government. So to get them to recognize that this is a serious issue and to take action. And we want to do that particularly through empowering both children themselves and victims and survivors of abuse. Both of these groups we feel have not been brought to the fore in the response. Their input hasn't been used as effectively as we would like. So we want to grow that engagement as we move forward. The second key objective is on knowledge. So we want to provide our members with the best possible information on the nature of the threat and how to respond to it. So those 2 elements are incredibly important, both the threat and the response. So this assessment, looking particularly at COVID-19, is part of that. But we have a number of products which are available on our website. We have our global threat assessment, which we produce every 2 years, looking at the threat writ large across the globe. So the most recent of those was published in December 2019. There's Model National Response, which sets out a framework for countries to follow if they want to tackle online child sexual abuse. And then the next level up from that, which was again launched in December, is our Global Strategic Response, which is setting a similar framework, looking at transnational response, recognizing that this is an issue that crosses legal jurisdictions, it crosses borders. So how do we best grip that? And all of those frameworks are available to be adapted according to national circumstances. And then finally, our final objective is collaboration. So that's really important. It's really why we exist, to ensure that the resources that are being put forward to counter online child sexual exploitation are being spent in a coordinated way, that we're not duplicating effort, that all of our members know what's going on, that they can learn from each other. And we do that in various different ways. We do that through events. So we've ran with our industry members hackathons, so events where engineers can come together and work on a particular solution. So that the most recent of those culminated in the launch of something called Project Artemis, which is an online tool to tackle grooming online. We run summits. So our most recent was in partnership with the African Union in Addis Ababa in December last year. So we're having to adapt our program of events for the coming year because of the situation that we find ourselves in. But we want to adapt and do more online. We want to really improve our website and use that as an even better way to engage with our network. So that's a brief introduction of who we are and what we do. So just to set the current assessment in context. So when the pandemic first really started to impact on people's lives, we were in consultation with a lot of our our contacts with the UN, the Global Partnership to End Violence Against Children, and agreeing with the where we can all respectively add value. And there was agreement that there was an appetite from our stakeholders for a short assessment, setting out, bringing together the information that we have, drawing some cautious assessment conclusions, and signposting people to where they can look for next steps. So that's what we've done. The feedback has been very positive so far, so we're actually looking to build these shorter assessments into a quarterly series. So we're very open to ideas for topics for those assessments. So do please let us know if there's an issue that you would find it useful for us to look into. The next one, we're going to look into the instances of child sexual exploitation in the adult pornography industry. So that's something that we've been seeing in the media and has been raised by some of our contacts. So that's going to be our next one. But beyond that, we are very open to ideas.
Ian,
yes.
Excuse me, so sorry. The slides are not advancing. I just wanted to let you know.
Oh, no, that's fine. I haven't advanced them.
Oh, perfect. Thank you.
No problem. So with that, I have just to go into the overall conclusions of the report. So these are our summary judgments. So I want to just highlight that there's an impact on both the threat and the response. So that's really important to remember, particularly as restrictions in different parts of the world are lifting at different rates. And some of the impacts may vary and change. I think looking particularly at that impact on that response, there is going to be an effect from the COVID pandemic for a long time. There are huge amounts of government attention being placed on rightly addressing the pandemic, and that will affect prioritization and funding. So the past 10 years have seen significant growth in investment in child sexual abuse and exploitation, and particularly work online. So looking back to my old team within the UK Home Office, 10 years ago, that was only a few people, 3 or 4. It's now nearly 50, and that's growth in staff has also been matched by funding going in. There's a question, I think, for many jurisdictions on prioritization. So that's something to remember as well, beyond the immediate effects. So our headline conclusion is that there's a high probability of an increase in numbers of online child sexual exploitation cases due to COVID-19 restrictions. So all of the drivers that we had identified previously in terms of increasing the risks of exploitation are exacerbated by the restrictions we've seen. There's greater unsupervised internet use, likely to expose children to greater risks of exploitation online, and also we're likely to see an increase in self-generated materials. That's material that children have produced themselves. It may not be wittingly produced. It may be they may think that it's going to someone of their own age. They may be being this may be a case of extortion or deception. But when you've got large numbers of children effectively leading their social lives online, the risks of riskier behaviours are likely to increase. We're also seeing increase in emotional vulnerability, which we know opens the door for offenders to manipulate children and groom them for abuse. We're going to look at how the restrictions have affected offender behaviour. So we're going to look at that in detail, and then moving on to the response. Report services are being disrupted. So the current systems that reporting services have, so for example, the US National Centre for Missing and Exploited Children, the Canadian Centre for Child Protection, the UK's Internet Watch Foundation, all of these systems were conceived to be reliant or to have a heavy involvement of human moderators. So those are currently being disrupted. And then the point I made earlier about the wider focus of governments and law enforcement on COVID-19, direct COVID-19 issues. So it may lead to lower prioritization. So just moving on to the next slide. So we think that the drivers that we'd identified within our last global threat assessment, which are that more kids are coming online globally, and they're coming online in a different way than they had done in years past. So if you look at countries where internet use is quite mature, the curve of internet use, which was quite shallow. It enabled support services to grow in tandem as you moved from dial-up connections through to broadband, through to mobile. You're getting in areas where connectivity is increasing fastest. So, for example, in Africa, parts of Asia, you are moving potentially from no internet access to internet on a smartphone in your pocket. So that's leapfrogging faster than support services can keep up. We're also seeing more sophisticated and networked offenders. So they're using they're sharing techniques together. They're helping each other to shift their moral boundaries. They're saying that, you know, this is fine, this is okay, and drawing people to act out on urges to a greater extent than previously. So COVID-19 has led to an acceleration of these drivers and providing new opportunities for abusers. So just a note there on our confidence in our data. So it is too early to see major changes in the quantitative data picture. So I want to say that up front. We are working from the intelligence that we have. That's patchy, and it's largely qualitative. So we're reliant on experts' opinion. We're reliant on what studies have been done in a short period of time. But it's important to make that caveat clear. But that being said, we have run our conclusions through our membership, through the experts that we have, and they were all very happy to sign off on these conclusions. So we have gone through a period of peer review on that. So just to look here at early indicators of growth in online child sexual exploitation cases during the lockdown. I think I'd just highlight the reporting from WebIQ there. Over 200% increase in posts on known child sex abuse forums from February 2020 to March 2020. That's an enormous increase. demonstrating that there was increased activity from offenders. The India Child Protection Fund has registered a spike in online searches for child sexual abuse material, and I definitely would recommend you read their full report. It's available on their website, but you know, they're a new fund, and there's some really important conclusions coming through from that report. And then the National Centre for Missing and Exploited Children's 106% increase in reports from March 2019 compared to March 2020. The NCMEC is important because under US law, all US-based companies have to report into NCMEC. So that includes a lot of the services that you will be very familiar with. So Facebook, Twitter, Google, Apple, they're all required to report in, and they have also on their website, they have a very helpful graph showing the breadth of countries that they receive reports from. So nearly every country in the world is represented. Just looking now on risk factors for children. So it's very important to underline that the fault for online child sexual abuse is always that of the offender, always. It is never the child's fault. The child can never give consent. But this slide is highlighting some of the vulnerabilities that we know offenders, based on our understanding of the way they operate, have traditionally taken advantage of. And again, this is about drivers that already existed being exacerbated by COVID-19. So this is research from the UK's National Society for Prevention of Cruelty to Children. So they provide a counselling service called Childline, and this illustrates the degree of concern amongst children, and I think that it is almost natural to expect this is disruptive for everyone globally. This is an absolutely unprecedented experience. But what the difference is compared to years past is that those children have an outlet online, and there are people out there who are prepared to exploit that vulnerability. Just to note that this will be very interesting to follow these statistics when lockdown measures begin to be lifted. So we know that there is a significant backlog for mental health support services to process, as prioritization of health services has been, again, rightly towards COVID-19. But there is growing consensus that there's going to be a huge increase in demand on those services, which is likely to impact on victims and survivors of abuse. Also to note, these statistics are from the West, from higher income countries. It's likely that these drivers will be even more significantly exacerbated in lower income countries. So another element is on caregiver supervision. So parents may have to be working from home while simultaneously trying to homeschool their children and deal with other responsibilities. So it's clear that children are being exposed to longer screen time. It may well be unsupervised, and that again opens up a vulnerability for offenders to exploit. children spending longer online, looking for social contact because they are not able to go out and see their friends, see their peers, go to school. There's that opportunity for offenders. And what we've seen in analysis of how offenders have used in the past, have acted in the past, they are very resourceful in the way that they engage children. They will go to where children are. They will look to exploit gaming platforms. They will look to conceal their identity. They will look for loopholes and opportunities. And I think that the COVID-19 period offers that to them. And age verification remains a significant gap. So sites like Facebook, in its terms and conditions, says it should be for young people who are 13 and over, but there's no way to verify that. There's no way to monitor that. It is certain that there are children younger than that using these platforms and leaving them open to abuse. Just moving on to offender attitudes. So we judge that offenders will seek to exploit the COVID-19 lockdown in the same way, as I said before, they exploit any opportunity that they can see. Some of the evidence we've seen so far is that offenders are usually more likely to offend when their lifestyle is affected by a significant change. So this may be likely to tip more potential offenders through the stress and impact of the COVID-19 situation into potentially offending. So the numbers of offenders may well increase because more people are likely to act on impulses that they may already have been struggling to deal with. Some other offenders who may previously have been traveling abusers, so obviously travel restrictions have reduced that threat, but they may be grooming children with a view to traveling out to carry out abuse when restrictions are lifted, or alternatively moving to live streaming. So we know from countries like the Philippines, where there has been a history of child sexual abuse, some of those criminals in those countries have diversified into live streaming, and as we know that that crime type can be carried out by financial gain, the economic circumstances brought about by COVID-19 and economic hardship may push more people into considering this carrying out abuse with their own children or with children that they have access to raise money. And then finally, looking at the dark web. So the dark web, I'll just explain that term. It's the area of the internet that requires particular access protocols to get into. So it's the part of the internet that you can't easily access via search engines. It requires online gateways to get into. So one of the most well-known gateways is called Tor, T-O-R. The onion router, it stands for, and offenders use these highly encrypted gateways to be able to speak to each other and engage in what they see as a safer environment. So data from Europol, the EU's police body, confirms that child sexual abuse material continues to be distributed via dark web platforms, but also that there's an increase in activity there since the start of the the COVID-19 pandemic. So then just finally, so because I want to have plenty of time for questions, the impact on response measures. So isolation measures have increased the difficulties in processing reports of online abuse. So there are still large numbers of reports coming through, but because moderators aren't able to access them, because it is illegal to do so from a home environment and without secure connections, or it's very difficult from a well-being perspective to compartmentalize that very difficult material within a home environment, and for all kinds of other reasons. There's a secondary impact in being able to process and remove those that material. So the statistic on there is from the UK's Internet Watch Foundation, but anecdotally we've heard this across the board from a number of hotlines and portals, that their ways of reviewing are based on human input. So artificial intelligence plays a role, but usually that is in triaging material to put it up to human moderation, so that ultimate decision is taken by a human. That's becoming much more difficult. And then also the point on law enforcement personnel supporting lockdown measures. So there's a further disruption. So we've seen, if you've seen in the media, there have been some tremendous successes. So a huge tribute to law enforcement agencies who are still going out and leading investigations, but it's much harder than it was. The justice system has been disrupted by COVID-19 restrictions. Cases aren't being able to get to court as quickly. The ability to question offenders has been disrupted. So there are all kinds of secondary impacts that, again, are likely to be more severely felt in lower income countries where there may be fewer law enforcement personnel available and with the right training to carry out these kind of investigations. So it's likely to have a lasting impact. So I'm just going to close there, because I want to make sure that you've got the opportunity to ask any questions you might want to. But I mean, just to close, I mean, I think these are sobering findings, but I think they're not surprising to us. I think for those of us that have been following the issue for a long time, the stereotype of an abuser being a stranger, being someone who's entirely unknown to the child, has for a long time been obsolete. What we know from statistics is that the home can be a dangerous place for children. A lot of the significant proportion of the child sexual abuse material that we see has been produced in the home, and by someone who is known to the child, either a family member or otherwise. So the idea of the home as a safe haven sadly doesn't apply, and we can see that through live streaming cases, through the child sexual abuse material we see being uploaded. I think this is something we're going to keep under close review as restrictions begin to be lifted, and as we start to see more quantitative data coming through, which can give us a more detailed picture of what's happening, what has happened during the period of COVID restrictions. But we wanted to bring this together sort of in a timely way, so it could be used while the restrictions were still in place. We value your feedback. We value any thoughts and contributions you have, and we value your input into any future assessments. So thank you very much for your attention, and look forward to responding to any of your questions. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you so much, Ian, for sharing this information with us today. I'm going to put up a different slide while we ask questions. One moment, please. Just wanted to have contact information up. Okay, Ian, can you see my slide?
I can.
Okay, great. We have lots of great questions coming in, so I'll do my best to organize these and ask our presenter. We have several questions coming in about, parents in the home and how to talk to young children about these issues. And also if you can speak to any particular tools that parents and families could be using in the home and online to detect trouble.
Absolutely. So I think in terms of guidelines for parents, in our in the threat assessment at the end, there is some guidance on where people can go for further information. So I particularly like to highlight the resources provided by the Global Partnership to End Violence Against Children. So they've been playing a fantastic role in bringing together all of the information, looking at a whole range of online harms. So not just online child sexual exploitation, but all aspects of online harms, providing them as a kind of one-stop shop for users. So there's advice for parents on there, caregivers, educators, children, in a range of formats. So that's in partnership with all kinds of stakeholders, so UNICEF, a range of tech companies have got some really useful public safety announcements on there. So there's lots and lots of material. There's also a lot of resources from the Australian e-Safety Commissioner. So those are produced for Australian audience, but I think they have very wide application, and they go into a lot of detail on what can be done. So those are, I would say those would be the ones we would signpost. I think also in terms of response, our own model national response still applies more than ever at this time. So I think the framework that provides in terms of, if you're coming from a perspective where you're looking at what is an ideal response, what should I be focusing on, where should I be lobbying my government, that provides some guidance. Also note that the WePROTECT Global Alliance, amongst many others, including the WHO and UNICEF, has signed a leader's statement to emphasize to governments that child safety needs to be prioritized. So to answer that point I made on the final slide, that this is an integral part of the impact of COVID-19. It's not a nice to have. It's a fact that this has genuinely, and I think the assessment backs that up, has put children at greater risk. So sorry, I've just, you couldn't repeat the second half of the question, Heather.
If I remember, let's see. I think the second half was just in regards to specific tools for parents and families to use at home to detect trouble, online. If
Um,
there's,
so I think that's so I think that it depends very much on what jurisdiction you're on, what providers you're using. That there's the it's very difficult to give a sort of overall response, knowing sort of the international audience that you have. But I think certainly that there will be resources available from most providers on how to put in protections for children on sites, and I think a lot of platforms. So, for example, my kids love to go on YouTube. There's different characters and series that they love to watch, but there are protections that I can put on YouTube to make sure that they don't get linked into um, uh, inappropriate material. So I think there's as parents, it's really important to understand how our kids are using the internet, and speaking to our children about how they're using the internet. So I think that's probably one of the most important defenses and ways we can empower our children. And I think uh, one of my colleagues working on the Safer Internet Day campaign made an excellent point when he said that we teach people to drive by teaching them how to use the road. We don't necessarily teach them by showing them videos of terrible car crashes. So I think in terms of online safety, that's I think a really good approach to take to sort of help to show children how to use the internet safely. And the internet has been an incredible resource during this pandemic. I mean, it would have been a totally different experience to think about this 15 years ago, even 10 years ago, in terms of the connectivity and being able to run events like this, and being able to, our kids being able to access learning and classes. So I think, WePROTECT Global Alliance is very much pro-internet, pro-connectivity, and pro children using the internet. But to get the most out of the internet, they need to be able to do that in a safe way. So I think that I'd go first to the resources on the End Violence website, which I will, so that is I'll just give you the website. So it's end-violence.org, and they have a whole site on online harms response, which we have been playing a really active role in helping to support.
okay, great. And speaking of access, we're getting a couple questions asking if you could elaborate a little bit on the dark web. You mentioned that predators speak to each other that way and share materials. Is this something that children also can access or connect on, or could you clarify that a bit?
Sure. So they can. I think it's so it is actually, you can access tools like Tor through the open web. You can get in there and it brings up a browser. That you don't require a great deal of technological know-how to do it. I would say it's something that it's a tool that offenders tend to use to share their material in what they perceive to be a safe space. So it's not generally, we don't generally see children using it so much, though it's definitely very possible for them to do so. But we think the greater risk there is for offenders to be networking, to share material, so there are sites there or message boards there where to be a member, you have to upload a certain amount of images or video every month. So you have to, and it has to be new content. So you have to go out and either commit abuse and upload that on there. So it's definite, but I think it's the vast majority of abuse still takes place on the open web. This is just another element of the threat. And I think to find out more about the dark web and in a lot of detail, I would definitely recommend our global threat assessment, which is available on our website, WePROTECT.org. So that provides all the detail in very clearly and explained and very simple about what the dark web is and what we understand the risks are there.
Okay, thank you very much. We're getting several questions related to social media platforms and tech companies. You mentioned that platforms are required to report child sexual exploitation that they see on their platforms. And you also mentioned that even though they require users to be 13 and older, they don't really monitor that or have no way of monitoring that. Could you just speak a bit more to things they are required to do, things they could or should be doing, and if there's any accountability to these companies for following through on these things?
Sure. So it's a very, very good question, and I think so. US-based companies under American law have to report any incidents of abuse that they are aware of to the NetMech Center. So that process. So because many of the most widely used companies worldwide are US-based, that means that there are reports coming in from all over the world. But then that means there's a large volume of those reports for NetMech to process and then assess and try and remove that material. A lot of so we have 30 tech companies currently as members of WePROTECT Global Alliance. That is a means through which we try and push them to play as active a role as possible in taking down this material. And certainly those companies that we have signed up they have teams dedicated to this. They work. They do work very hard to try and ensure their platforms are as safe as possible. But there is, I think, in terms of accountability, because you're looking at multinational companies, it is quite challenging. And I think, to the question, could companies do more? Yes, definitely. So an example of this was last year. There were a set of voluntary principles to target online child sexual abuse that were signed up to by a group of companies. The original group were Twitter, Facebook, Google, Roblox, Snap, and Microsoft. And those set out a series of expectations that the companies and governments have agreed. So that's something that WePROTECT has a role in pushing. You can find them on our website. So what we want to do is to work with the companies to make sure that those voluntary principles are being enacted. That we can see evidence of how they're being enacted, and we're sharing that good practice and trying to build a virtuous circle. On the terms and conditions point and age verification, I think age verification is a very challenging thing to do technically for it to be meaningful. So you can have you can have some jurisdictions have it for sites relating to alcohol, for example. You need to put your date of birth. So obviously that is open to people getting round it. So it is technically quite challenging to verify that, but I think it's really important that that's something that companies prioritize, because if they are saying that their platforms are suitable for people only above a certain age, then we would expect them to be taking measures to ensure that is the case.
Okay, thank you. We have a question here about interagency work, for example, between police forces, child protection, probation services, et cetera, asking what increased oversight considerations should be prioritized during this time of restriction and maybe going forward.
I think interagency working on this issue has always been absolutely essential. It is really crucial to bring in social services at an early point to ensure that victims and survivors are protected, to ensure that the judicial experience is avoids re-traumatization. But that is a very difficult thing to do, and it's to do it right requires a good degree of investment. So I think it's really important to push governments to continue to see this as a priority. I think it will always vary jurisdiction to jurisdiction as to what the particular what is the particular legal framework. How do you is there a role for investigating prosecutor? Is there a role for is it common law, Roman law? So this will vary country to country, but I think the different agencies involved in these cases, there is a particular onus to collaborate to be able to get the best outcomes, because certainly in the UK that's a lesson we learned, where cases were not leading to convictions. They weren't and they were very damaging for victims. We've tried to invest a lot in improving that, and I think there's work to do across the board to make sure that victim-centered approach continues throughout the COVID period.
Okay, thank you. You've mentioned that it's too early to see much data on the changes that have occurred since COVID-19 began. Do you have any recommendations or thoughts on what data should be collected at this time or going forward?
That's an excellent question. So I think what we would love to see is a sort of before and after comparison of reports going into police and other law enforcement, reports going into portals such as NECMEC or IWF, and being able to do that comparison between sort of pre-COVID, post-COVID. I'd also be really interested in those statistics after restrictions have been lifted to sort of demonstrate what's been the impact there. If in an ideal world, it would be great to do more in-depth surveying of children. So there is a project underway at the moment in a number of countries in Africa and Southeast Asia called Disrupting Harm, which was commissioned before COVID-19 with funding from the Fund to End Violence Against Children, and it was designed to produce national level threat assessments for online child sexual exploitation in each of those countries, and it was to be delivered by Interpol, the UNICEF's Global Kids Online, and ECPAT International. And unfortunately, the field work for that research has been disrupted somewhat by COVID. But I know they're adapting and they're trying to ensure that they're able to continue through different mechanisms. And I think their findings will be really, really interesting. Because I'm very, very conscious of the fact that a lot of the data that we've got is very Western centric, and that's a problem we've wrestled with for a long time. And we tried to, so we really tried to diversify our knowledge base for the last global threat assessment compared to its predecessor, and it's also why the Indian ICPF report is particularly interesting, because it gives a non-Western perspective. Another point I'd just like to make on that report, which is quite interesting, is that India is one of those countries where all pornography, adult as well, is illegal, and that but yet there are still lots of ways and mechanisms to get around that restriction. And also, from all the information that we've seen, and this is something we're going to look at in more depth in our next short assessment, the fact that adult pornography is banned does not appear to have a significant effect on whether there is a problem from child sexual exploitation. So that's something we're looking to go into in more depth. But it is, the two are definitely connected. So you'll see in the assessment that our colleagues in the Marie Collins Foundation assess that so greater searches for adult pornography is likely to indicate greater searches for child sexual abuse material.
Okay, thank you for that. I think I'll ask one final question. We're getting lots of questions and requests regarding some of the resources you've mentioned. So just I don't know if you want to repeat or add to any specific resources that you can recommend for both professionals working with children, but even for parents and children to talk about this issue. Yeah.
Sure. So I think parents and children, I would say end violence is your first port of call. I think also we've got a whole range of resources on our own website in terms of threat assessments, response documents. I would also highlight the Safer Internet Day. So it's saferinternetday.org. That's a worldwide campaign looking at online safety writ large. So they have a lot of resources there. It's a great portal to look at. And then finally, I think if you're looking at legal frameworks, and if you're interested in, so I know some people have different legal frameworks where, for some legal frameworks, there's no reference to child sexual exploitation at all. Some don't criminalize grooming, others don't, you have to be essentially caught in the act. So if you're interested in those kind of comparisons, I thoroughly recommend the ICMEC website. So ICMEC, and they have a model legislation portal, which shows, so they're so it's icmec.org, and they have model legislation which sets out what they think is the kind of gold standard of legislation for child sexual exploitation, and they also assess. So their latest report was for 2019, but they provide information on almost every country you can imagine on how they comply, how they measure up against that model framework. So that's really worth reading. And then finally, I would say it's worth reading the Lanzarote Convention, which is a convention that came out of the Council of Europe, looking at child sexual abuse writ large, so online and offline. But that's something that non-Council of Europe members can accede to. So Tunisia has done so. So it's worth looking at, because that really is a detailed resource, and really worth reading.
And that last one, the Council of Europe one, can you repeat the name?
Sure, it is the Lanzarote Convention. I will find the website for you.
Okay.
So it's at coe.int, and then Lanzarote Committee, LANZAROTE. So that's the place where it was signed. But if you search for that, you should find it. But that's a really helpful resource.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. We will make a list of these resources available. You've listed some really great ones, so thank you for that. We're about out of time, so I wanted to thank everyone for sending in your questions. We could not get to all of them. There were some great questions we don't have time to get to, but you can see Ian's email address here on the screen, so please feel free to reach out to him directly if you have a specific question. And just to conclude, ISPCAN would like to invite everyone to visit our COVID-19 resources page for a variety of resources for different disciplines, as well as for parents and children. You'll also find information on this page related to our upcoming webinars on COVID-19. And we encourage you to become a member of ISPCAN if you're not already, so that we can continue having webinars like these. Our member benefits include discounts to our congresses, including our 2021 congresses in Italy and Australia. We offer several membership levels, including professional, student, emeritus, group membership, and associate membership, starting at $35 a year. To learn more about ISPCAN, please visit us at ispcan.org. A recording and the slides from today's webinar will be posted on our website shortly. If you have any questions or comments about today's webinar or any of our upcoming webinars, please contact us at resources@ispcan.org. And again, if you have questions for Mr. Drennan that did not get answered today, you can contact him by email. On behalf of all of us at ISPCAN, we hope you have a great day or night, depending on where you are, and that you stay safe and stay healthy. Ian, thank you again so much.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Okay, goodbye, everyone.
Bye.